Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the blazing sands of ancient Egypt, where the Nile cuts like a silver ribbon through an ocean of gold. The air shimmers, the cicadas rattle, and the desert sun presses down on you as if it is sworn a personal vendetta. You think you're tough, maybe even adventurous, but spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Not even for a day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you guys are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun greets you like an overzealous host at a party you don't want to attend. It's not warm, it's brutal. The desert doesn't care that you're new here. Within minutes, your lips are dry, your scalp tingles, and your eyes burn with sweat. Forget sunscreen, unless you fancy that crocodile dung concoction the locals smear on their skin. Yes, real crocodile dung. You're starting to wonder if maybe the sunburn isn't so bad after all. You squint at the horizon, and the world shimmers like a mirage. In truth, the land's lifeline is the Nile itself. Without that long green strip of fertile soil hugging the riverbanks, you'd be toast. Literally. And yet, even near the water, shade is hard to come by. Trees are rare, palm groves are precious, and most Egyptians simply endure the sun's hammering as part of life. You? Well, your body isn't used to it. Your skin prickles and your head spins. The telltale signs of heat stroke creeping in faster than you expect. But Egyptians learned survival through routine. They rose before dawn, working while the air was still tolerable. You, however, oversleep. By the time you stumble outside, the world already feels like the inside of a clay oven. Sand scorches your ankles, and the linen tunic clings to your damp skin. Egyptians wore simple linen for comfort, but linen doesn't stop the burn, it just keeps you from baking faster. Historians still argue whether people spent more time indoors or braved the elements, but one thing's certain, you're not cut out for either. Here's the mainstream fact. Egypt's entire rhythm of life pulsed with the sun. Temples were aligned to its rising, the calendar revolved around its patterns, and farmers relied on its predictable cruelty. The ancient Egyptians didn't just worship Ra, the sun god. They feared him, respected him, and lived by his schedule. Meanwhile, you can barely last half an hour without mumbling prayers to Ra yourself, begging for mercy. Now for a quirky tidbit. Evidence shows that some Egyptians actually shaved their entire bodies to cope with the heat and avoid lice. Imagine standing under this sun completely hairless, slicked up with oils and perfume. It's not exactly your usual beach day attire, but it worked for them. You, on the other hand, just wish you had SPF 50. The locals glance at you curiously as you stumble through the dusty path. They're used to this. You're clearly not. Sweat streams down your back, and the temptation to plunge into the Nile becomes almost irresistible. But remember, this isn't a lazy modern-day river float. The Nile hides crocodiles longer than you are tall, and hippos that can snap a canoe in two. You're better off enduring the furnace on land. The longer you linger, the worse it gets. Your throat feels like sandpaper, your head is pounding, and the blazing light makes it hard to focus. You try to cover your head with a scrap of cloth, but it's laughably inadequate. Locals sometimes wore woven reeds or lightweight head coverings, but you didn't think to bring one. Classic tourist mistake. 3,000 years before tourism was even a thing. Historians still argue whether climate conditions were harsher in certain dynasties, due to shifts in the Nile floods. Some believe there were devastating droughts that left people starving under this same sun, their fields cracked and dry. Looking around, you realize even in normal times, It feels impossible. And you've only been outside for an hour. That's the irony of it. The very light that made Egyptian civilization flourish is the same force crushing you now. Without the sun, there'd be no harvests, no predictable floods, no grand monuments. But standing here, your vision narrowing, you feel less like a participant in history, and more like a badly grilled fish. Egyptians trained their bodies, adapted their routines, and still suffered under it. Well, you probably wouldn't last past noon. So you stagger back toward the shade of a mud brick wall, desperate for relief, wondering how in the world people manage this every single day without fainting. And you know, this is only the beginning. The shade gives you only a short reprieve, because hunger gnaws almost as fiercely as the sun. Your stomach growls, and you follow the scent of baking bread drifting from a small courtyard. Ancient Egypt may dazzle you with pyramids and temples, but daily life is powered by the humbler miracle of grain. Wheat and barley aren't just food here, they are survival, status, and sometimes even currency. And you're about to learn why the phrase daily bread wasn't poetic, it was desperate. You watch a woman pounding grain with a stone mortar. She's rhythmic, efficient, strong, but the sound grates on your already weary head. Flour dust fills the air, and here's your first unpleasant surprise. This isn't soft, fluffy flour like in modern bakeries. It's gritty. The kernstones shed bits of sand and mineral into the mix, so every bite of bread is like chewing a fine layer of sandpaper. Ancient skulls show teeth worn flat, riddled with abscesses, as if people spent their lives crunching gravel. And now, you bite into your first hunk of fresh Egyptian bread, only to feel that crunch. Delicious? Maybe. Comfortable? Absolutely not. Bread is usually washed down with beer, but not the crisp kind you'd sip at a summer barbecue. Egyptian beer is thick, cloudy, and closer to porridge than a beverage. It's nourishing, yes, packed with calories and vitamins from fermented grain, but you nearly choke on its lumpy texture. Imagine drinking a loaf of soggy bread through a straw. That's the daily staple. Still, it keeps people alive in this heat, and after 2 mouthfuls, you grudgingly admit it's filling. Historians still argue whether the average Egyptian diet was healthy by today's standards. On the one hand, it was mostly plant-based, loaded with fiber and natural nutrients. On the other hand, the constant grit wore down teeth, and famines lurked, just one failed flood away. Either way, you're realizing this isn't a foodie paradise, it's survival cuisine. Here's the mainstream fact: bread and beer made up about 70 to 80% of a peasant's diet. Meat was rare, fish occasional, and fruits or vegetables only appeared when harvests were generous. That means day after day, meal after meal, you're gnawing the same coarse loaves, sipping the same thick beer. Excitement on the table meant maybe an onion, a date, or if the gods were kind, a sliver of dried fish. And now for the quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found loaves buried in tombs, charred but still intact after thousands of years. Imagine bread so durable it survives millennia, but also so tough it probably could have doubled as a weapon while fresh. You chew another mouthful, and it feels exactly like that. Edible masonry. As you sit in the dusty courtyard, children scamper by, clutching tiny bits of bread. The woman offers you more bread, and though your teeth already ache, you accept. Refusing would be rude, and hospitality is sacred. You try not to wince as you crunch through another bite, pretending it's delightful. She nods approvingly. You're learning quickly that in this land, manners matter as much as survival. Your gut, however, is staging a dead. Their laughter briefly distracts you from the discomfort, but you notice how carefully they guard those scraps. Hunger here isn't a mood, it's a constant backdrop. One bad flood, one locust swarm, and families could find themselves without enough to eat. You think of your own kitchen back home, stocked with snacks, sauces, and sweets, and suddenly, it feels almost obscene compared to this daily struggle. The woman offers you more bread, and though your teeth already ache, you accept. Refusing would be rude, and hospitality is sacred. You try not to wince as you crunch through another bite, pretending it's delightful. She nods approvingly. You're learning quickly that in this land, manners matter as much as survival. Your gut, however, is staging a rebellion. Between the grit, the strange texture, and the heavy beer, you're already feeling bloated and uneasy. And yet, this is just a normal lunch. Egyptians worked entire days fueled by this alone, laboring in fields or hauling stones under that pitiless sun. You can barely sit upright without shifting uncomfortably. Historians still argue whether bread was deliberately baked hard to preserve longer, or if the sand contamination was unavoidable. Either way, your jaw is sore, your teeth gritty, and your body sluggish. You finally understand why Egyptian art often depicted people with rounded bellies. It wasn't luxury, it was bread and beer bloating from sunup to sundown. You lean back, drowsy, but the heat presses in, making sleep impossible. Hunger is no longer the issue. Now, thirst claws at your throat, and as you stagger toward the riverbank, you're about to discover that quenching your thirst in ancient Egypt is its own dangerous. In some way, one man flashes off and speds the sound. He carries a large bed of frosts, hollows, and pens. Your tongue feels like it's glued to the roof of your mouth, and the gritty bread isn't helping. You make your way toward the Nile, convinced that one sip of cool water will save you. The river glitters under the sun, a shimmering promise of relief. But here's the truth you didn't want to hear. Drinking from the Nile is less like sipping from a pristine mountain spring, and more like playing microbial roulette. You kneel at the bank, cupping your hands, and the water looks innocent enough. It ripples gently, reflecting the palms and mud brick houses nearby. But the Egyptians knew better. This water is alive, with parasites, bacteria, and all the lovely microscopic hitchhikers that can turn your stomach into a war zone. You scoop up a sip anyway, desperate, and immediately taste the muddiness. It's not refreshing, it's earthy, murky, with an aftertaste that suggests river salad. Here's the mainstream fact. Most ancient Egyptians drank directly from the Nile, or from jars filled and stored in their homes. They didn't boil it, and filtration was primitive at best. Sometimes reeds or cloth were used to strain debris, but that doesn't stop amoebas or parasites. And parasites loved Egypt. Schistosomiasis, a nasty worm infection, was rampant. It could leave people exhausted, bloated, and in chronic pain. One careless gulp, and your stomach's already protesting. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some households tried adding natron, a natural salt used in mummification, to their drinking water. Supposedly it helped purify, though it also gave the water a distinctly soapy flavor. Imagine reaching for a cool glass, only to get a mouthful of salty detergent. You gag a little at the thought, wiping your mouth after another tentative sip. Historians still argue whether the average Egyptian actually developed a tolerance for these waterborne diseases, living with chronic infections as a normal part of life. Some evidence suggests most people simply adapted, carrying worms and parasites for years without fully succumbing. But you've been here less than a day, and already feel a gurgle in your gut that spells trouble. Children nearby laugh as they splash in the river. To them, it's playtime. To you, it looks like a death wish. A crocodile's eye briefly breaks the surface far downstream, and you shiver. You realize the Nile isn't just a water source, it's a paradox. Life and death swell together in every current. Without it, Egypt wouldn't exist. With it, survival is a gamble. You stagger back from the bank, clutching your belly. The beer earlier suddenly seems like a smarter choice, however lumpy. Egyptians drank beer constantly, not just for pleasure, but because it was safer than straight river water. The fermentation killed off some nastiness, turning barley sludge into liquid life insurance. It wasn't perfect, but it beat amoebic dysentery. You're starting to see why children drank beer as readily as milk. Still, thirst is relentless. You sneak another sip, because what choice do you have? Your lips are cracking, your body begging for moisture, and this is the daily dilemma. Endure dehydration or risk infection. Neither feels like a victory. You think of modern bottled water, filters, ice cubes, and suddenly you'd give anything for a plastic jug from the corner store. The sun climbs higher, mocking you. Sweat pours off your body, undoing every drop you've just swallowed. Around you, Egyptians carry jars balanced on their heads with practiced grace. The clay keeps the water cooler, if not cleaner. You try lifting one, and nearly topple over. The jar is heavy, the path uneven, and your balance untrained. They laugh kindly at your clumsy attempt, and you realize again, these people grew up in this world. You didn't. Historians still argue whether most illnesses in ancient Egypt stemmed more from poor water quality or from malnutrition. The evidence suggests it was both, a vicious cycle. Parasites weakened bodies already worn down by bread grit and scorching labor. You're beginning to feel the spiral yourself, dry mouth, sore stomach, dizziness, and the creeping dread that water here is more foe than friend. You collapse in the shade of a palm, wiping sweat from your brow. Survival in Egypt isn't about dramatic battles or royal intrigues. It's about small daily negotiations with nature. Food is coarse, water is risky, and your modern body is already failing the test. And as the sun beats down, you glance toward the cluster of mud brick houses. Maybe shelter will save you. Maybe inside, things will finally feel manageable. End. Of course, once you step in, you'll find that Egyptian homes hold their own uncomfortable surprises. You duck into a mud brick house, thankful to escape the punishing glare of the sun. At first, the shade feels like a blessing, a cool cloak wrapping around your weary body. But give it 5 minutes, and you realize, cool is a relative word here. These homes are designed to resist the heat, yes, but they're not the breezy villas of travel brochures. They're cramped, smoky, and alive in ways you'd rather they weren't. The ceiling is low, the walls uneven, and everything smells faintly of earth mixed with sweat. Mud brick is cheap, quick to build, and plentiful. Just Nile mud mixed with straw, shaped into blocks, dried in the sun. Durable enough to last a few decades, but not exactly 5-star construction. You brush your hand along the wall, and flakes of dried mud crumble into your palm. The house feels temporary, like the land could swallow it whole after one bad flood. Here's the mainstream fact. Most Egyptians lived in small, single-room mud brick homes with flat roofs. Families slept together on mats, sometimes even on rooftops during summer nights, when the heat indoors was unbearable. Privacy wasn't really part of the architectural plan. You're standing in what feels like a hot clay box with one tiny window, and suddenly you're nostalgic for your cramped modern apartment. Rue. The air is heavy with smoke. A small clay hearth burns in the corner, where someone stirs a pot of lentils. There's no chimney, so the smoke lingers, seeping into your clothes and stinging your eyes. You cough, waving your hand dramatically, but no one else seems bothered. They'd lived their whole lives breathing this smoky haze. Lungs conditioned by necessity. You're hacking like an amateur. Now, for the quirky tidbit. Many Egyptian homes raised geese or even kept donkeys indoors during certain seasons. Imagine sharing your one-room apartment, not just with family, but also with livestock honking or bray in your ear. Tonight, you're lulled not by silence, but by the gentle serenade of a goose nibbling your toes. Cozy, right? Historians still argue whether houses were deliberately kept small to conserve building resources, or because communal outdoor spaces mattered more than in-more comfort. Some say Egyptians preferred life outside, working, eating, and socializing in courtyards, leaving the house for little more than sleeping. Looking around, you believe it. With bugs buzzing, smoke swirling, and neighbors practically within arm's reach, you'd probably rather be outside too, heat or no heat. Speaking of bugs, you notice the walls seem alive. Small beetles crawl across the floor, mosquitoes whine around your ears, flies swarm toward the lentil pot. You swat reflexively, but the locals barely blink. For them, it's normal. For you, it's a nightmare picnic you can't escape. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen and think, at least it might double as insect repellent. Desperate times. Children dart around your legs, playing with dolls made of clay and rags. Their laughter fills the space, but you can't shake the sense that there's no escape from the noise. One child points at you and giggles, probably at your ridiculous swatting dance against the bugs. You grin sheepishly, wiping sweat and smoke from your forehead. Night falls quickly in the desert, and you're invited to stay. Mats are rolled out, one beside the other. There are no walls for privacy, no doors to close. Families sleep in clusters, hoping their body heat wards off the chill. That's the other thing about Egypt. Sure, the days roast you, but the nights can surprise you with a creeping cold. You lie on a reed mat, straw poking your skin, wrapped in a thin cloth. And then, the noises begin. Donkeys bray, geese honk, neighbors argue through thin walls, and bugs stage a midnight feast. You shift uncomfortably, wishing for earplugs. Egyptians adapted by learning to sleep through chaos. You lie awake, hyper-aware of every scratch, buzz, and squeak. Historians still argue whether families rotated sleeping indoors and on rooftops, depending on seasons. Some say rooftops became social hubs, with people chatting under the stars, while others believe most stayed inside for protection from thieves or wandering animals. Either way, you're trapped in a mud brick cocoon, wondering how they managed rest in such conditions. You finally drift off, only to wake coughing from smoke, scratching at bites, and shivering in the early morning chill. As dawn's first light filters through the tiny window, you realize shelter in Egypt doesn't mean comfort. It just means survival at its most basic. You stagger outside, bleary-eyed, thinking maybe fresh air will help. Instead, the rising sun greets you again, merciless as ever. And now, as neighbors adjust their linen tunics and smear on oils, you're about to discover that even clothing and cosmetics in Egypt were more about survival than style. The sun is climbing again, and already you can feel yesterday's heat threatening to pick up where it left off. The neighbors are up early, dressing, oiling their skin, and fussing with things you didn't expect. Cosmetics. Yes, in ancient Egypt, everyone, men and women, had a morning routine, and you, bleary-eyed and still scratching mosquito bites, are about to join them. You're handed a linen tunic, light and simple. Linen is the fabric of choice, because wool is unbearable in this climate, and cotton hasn't yet made its debut. The fibers feel coarse against your skin, not the soft, factory-spun luxury you're used to. This is hand-woven, sturdy, practical. It drapes loosely to keep air moving, but the sun still pierces through, reminding you that fabric here is more a polite suggestion than a real barrier. Increase. The outfit sticks almost immediately to your sweat. You catch sight of yourself in a polished piece of copper used as a mirror, and the reflection is not flattering. You look like a soggy burrito. Cool. Here's the mainstream fact. Egyptians valued cleanliness and often changed clothes daily if they could afford it. Laundry wasn't done with fancy detergents, but with lye, natron, and pounding clothes against stones by the riverbank. You imagine your tunic stiffening after one wash and wonder how anyone felt fresh. Now for the quirky tidbit. Cosmetics weren't just vanity, they were survival. Egypts used kohl, that famous black eyeliner, to shield their eyes from the blazing sun and to ward off infections. The lead compounds in kohl may have even stimulated the immune system in small doses. So yes, when you smear black lines around your eyes, you're not just channeling Cleopatra, you're essentially wearing sunscreen and antibiotics in one stylish package. You glance at yourself again, now lined and smudged, and realize you look more like a raccoon than a royal. Still, your eyes stop stinging in the glare, so maybe raccoon chic works. Next comes the oils. Egyptians coated their skin in scented unguents made from animal fat, beeswax, and herbs. You dab some on, and instantly, you smell like a cross between a candle and a spice market. Your skin glistens, catching every grain of dust like flypaper. Still, the oil helps block sunburn and keeps your skin from cracking in the desert dryness. Locals nod approvingly, you're glistening like one of them now. Historians still argue whether lower-class Egyptians really used cosmetics daily, or if it was mostly an elite practice. Some evidence shows even peasants used basic ointments, while others believe elaborate kohl and perfumes were luxuries. Judging from the approving looks, at least some version of this ritual was widespread, and given how fierce the sun feels, you're happy to slather on anything. And then, there it is again. Crocodile dung. Yes, a neighbor casually suggests it as a protective salve. Supposedly mixed with honey or mud, it keeps your skin cool and shields against the sun. You freeze, smiling politely, trying to imagine how you'll decline without offending. Maybe later, you mutter, clutching your jar of oil like a lifeline. You decide you'd rather roast alive than smell like swamp monster sunscreen. Still, cosmetics aren't just practical. They're deeply cultural. Painted faces, perfumed wigs, and freshly laundered linen symbolized not just health but purity, a concept central to Egyptian life. To appear unkempt was to flirt with disorder, with the chaos Egyptians feared more than anything. So even peasants tried to stay neat. Despite living in mud brick homes filled with smoke and bugs. You, on the other hand, already feel like a mess. Children giggle as they tug at your tunic, pointing at the sweat stains already forming under your arms. One woman plucks a lotus blossom from a jar and tucks it behind her ear, then hands you one. You place it awkwardly, the petals wilting almost instantly against your damp hair. Egyptians loved lotus flowers as symbols of rebirth, often wearing them at banquets. For you, the poor blossom looks less like rebirth and more like resignation. Historians still argue whether men's use of wigs and perfumes was purely aesthetic or served ritual functions. Some believe wigs offered hygiene benefits, keeping lice away, while others think it was more about status. Either way, you watch as even laborers fuss with small touches, beads, amulets, neat linen folds, and you realize appearances mattered deeply, no matter how hard life was. You adjust your tunic, wipe kohl smudges from your cheeks, and try to ignore the sticky film of oil catching every speck of dust. The sun blazes higher, and neighbors are already heading to the fields, baskets and tools in hand. You're about to join them, glistening, blinking like a coal-lined raccoon, wondering how long you'll last in their workday before you collapse. You shuffle along with the others, your linen tunic clinging, and your skin already prickling under the rising sun. The tools they carry are simple: hoes, wooden plows, baskets woven from reeds. No gleaming steel here, just the bare minimum to keep the land in check. You've convinced yourself maybe farming will be manageable. After all, how hard can it be? But by the time the day is half gone, you realize work in ancient Egypt isn't a gentle stroll through golden fields. It's backbreaking, bone-grinding survival. The men and women move with the rhythm of routine, stooping to clear weeds, scattering seeds, or hauling water from canals that stretch like veins off the Nile. You copy them, bending to lift a basket of silt. It looks easy when they do it, but the moment you try, your back screams in protest. The weight drags at your arms, your knees wobble, and you nearly topple into the irrigation ditch. Clearly, you don't belong here. Here's the mainstream fact. Egypt's agricultural calendar revolved around the Nile's flood cycle. 3 seasons, flood, sowing, harvest, dictated everything. When the river swelled, farmers retreated. When the waters receded, they worked furiously, plowing and planting, before the soil hardened again. Your timing couldn't be worse. You've arrived in the sowing season, where labor stretches from sunrise to sunset. Oh, no. And for a quirky tidbit, evidence shows farmers sometimes sang work songs to keep pace, just like modern crews use chants or sea shanties. Imagine bending and hoeing to a chorus of voices, rhythm keeping your muscles from collapsing. You try joining in, humming along, but your out-of-tune warble earns more chuckles than encouragement. Historians still argue whether peasants willingly accepted their labor as part of divine order, or if they quietly resented it. And how are you explaining? Some scholars say they found pride in sustaining Egypt's lifeblood. Others believe the toil bred silent bitterness. Standing here, drenched in sweat and shaking from effort, you lean toward resentment. The midday sun grows unbearable. Your kohl eyeliner has melted into raccoon streaks, and the oil on your skin feels more like a frying layer than protection. Egyptians take short breaks, sipping their lumpy beer, maybe munching a scrap of bread. You gulp yours, trying not to gag at the texture, but your body begs for rest. Instead, you're shoved toward the next task, hauling mud brick. You stumble behind a crew dragging sledges piled with bricks. No wheels here, just raw strength and coordination. You pull with them, rope biting into your palms, your muscles quivering. Every few steps, the sledge snags on sand, and you lurch forward. Sweat blinds you, grit clings to your teeth, and you're pretty sure you left half your soul in the last ditch you crossed. And then you hear the gossip, whispers that workers like you are sometimes conscripted for royal projects. Renan. I want to know, grasped. Pyramids, temples, colossal statues, all requiring armies of laborers. Not slaves exactly, but not volunteers either. Imagine weeks or months of this, building monuments you'll never benefit from, all under the blazing sun. Your back twinges, and you pray no overseer drags you off to the next quarry. You glance at the others. Their hands are calloused, their backs hunched, their faces weathered, but their endurance is astounding. They don't collapse after one load. They don't groan after every bend. They've been doing this since childhood, conditioned by necessity. You're about as used but a decorative scarab beetle. The heat climbs higher, pushing the day into its cruelest stretch. You feel faint, head buzzing, body swaying. One farmer hands you a strip of linen, soaked in cool Nile water. You press it to your forehead, relief flooding your senses. For a moment, you almost believe you'll make it through the day. But then comes the next chore, threshing grain with cattle. Dust fills the air, choking your lungs. The animals snort and stomp, circling endlessly as you drive them around the threshing floor. The chaff clings to your sweaty skin, itching like 1,000 tiny needles. You sneeze, cough, and stumble, wondering if suffocation might come before exhaustion. Historians still argue whether peasants actually received fair shares of the harvest. Or if taxes stripped most of it away, temples and officials claimed large portions, leaving families with just enough to scrape by. End of politics. You can't imagine working like this for food you'll barely taste. The sun finally begins to dip, shadows stretching long across the fields. You stagger back toward the village, limbs trembling, chest heaving. Your hands are blistered, your back feels broken, and every step aches. Egyptians do this every single day of their lives, while you barely survived one. And as the first stars appear, drums beat in the distance. A messenger announces the pharaoh's decree, and villagers gather, bowing low. You realize that beyond the endless toil, there's another burden here, the divine weight of a ruler who claims ownership not just of your labor, but of your very life. The morning sun presses down again, relentless as ever, and your body protests at the very idea of movement. Today, you're being introduced to water management, the backbone of Egyptian survival, and your first real lesson in just how much humans had to manipulate the environment to thrive here. You trudge toward the irrigation ditches, wide channels of water carved from the Nile, lined with mud to prevent seepage. It's clever, yes, but also exhausting, and the laborers already working the channels move with a rhythm you can barely keep pace with. You try to lift a bucket filled from the canal, its weight magnified by sweat-soaked hands. Water sloshes over the sides and onto the earth below, and you curse under your breath, though the locals laugh gently at your clumsiness. They've done this for decades, while you're still figuring out how to balance the bucket without toppling into the muck. It's humbling. It's the worst thing you know, and here's the mainstream fact. Egypt's agriculture thrived because of a highly organized irrigation system. Farmers dug canals, built reservoirs, and used shadufs, levered water-lifting devices, to move water to fields that the Nile's flood didn't reach. As the Nile's flood didn't reach, without these innovations, life in Upper and Lower Egypt would have been impossible. You, however, are discovering that operating a shaduf without falling in is nearly impossible on your first try. Now for the quirky tidbit, some villagers used wooden ducks or other flotation toys to mark water levels in the canals, essentially early hydrological tools. You watch a carved duck bob in the current, thinking it's oddly charming, while your own bucket threatens to overturn every time you take a step. Historians still argue whether all irrigation work was carried out communally, or if some families managed private plots independently. Either way, the social aspect is unavoidable. Neighbors shout instructions, coordinate lifting, and tease you when you stumble. You're learning that survival in Egypt wasn't just about physical labor. It required cooperation, timing, and patience. Sweat drips from your brow into your eyes, stinging sharply. The sun above makes every movement heavy, yet you press on, understanding that without managing water, crops fail, food disappears, and survival becomes a daily gamble. Even the smallest miscalculation, overfilling a channel, breaking a mud wall, can ruin an entire field. Your arms shake, but you're determined. You won't give up just yet. The smell of wet mud fills your nose, rich and pungent. Tiny insects hover above the water, drawn to moisture, biting your hands and arms. You swat them away, but they persist, tiny reminders that life in Egypt never allows a true break from discomfort. The villages, of course, are unbothered. They've long adapted, much like they adapted to sun, sand, and the Nile itself. You glance at the neighboring field, where women are planting seeds in straight, precise lines. Their coordination is impressive. Every seed counts. A misstep could mean famine months later. You realize that even small errors in your clumsy hands could have devastating consequences if you were really a peasant here. And as you lift another bucket, the water-heavy rope burning your palms, you understand something crucial. Egyptians survived not just because of ingenuity or strength, but because they respected their environment, understood the Nile's rhythms, and worked together every single day. You, by contrast, are struggling to survive half a day without collapsing. Historians still argue whether ancient peasants truly appreciated their technological innovations, or if they saw them as burdens imposed by rulers. Either way, you can't help but marvel at the intelligence behind these canals and shadows, even as your muscles beg for mercy. By midday, you're exhausted, muddy, sticky, and yet oddly exhilarated. Surviving the sun and the Nile's labor, stumbling, a reminder that comfort is a modern luxury, and that life here is raw, relentless, and breathtakingly clever all at once. By now, the day has stretched into a relentless parade of chores, and you're beginning to understand that rest is a relative concept in ancient Egypt. The heat presses in, the sun glares mercilessly, and even when you pause, the work seems to seep into your very bones. Today, your lesson is farming tools, simple, yet brutally effective. You're handed a wooden hoe, its handle rough, and a spade carved from a single piece of wood. They look lightweight in the hands of a seasoned farmer, but in yours, every lift and thrust feels like a battle. You try to dig a furrow in the soil, imagining it will be straightforward. Instead, your hand slips, the spade bites unevenly, and the clods of earth resist your every move. The locals glance over, offering tips and corrections, but mostly they chuckle quietly at your struggles. You're learning quickly that even minor tools demanded skill honed over years, not minutes. Here's the mainstream fact. Egyptian plows were simple, often just a wooden stick with a pointed end or a basic plow attached to oxen. They weren't designed for comfort, they were designed to turn the soil efficiently. The efficiency mattered because planting windows were narrow, and the difference between a successful harvest and famine could be measured in inches of tilled earth. Quirky tidbit: some depictions show farmers using giant bird feathers to sweep away debris from seeds as they sowed. You catch yourself imagining a feather-wielding peasant, flapping dramatically in the heat. It's both ridiculous and oddly poetic. Historians still argue whether the average peasant owned his own tools or borrowed them communally. Evidence suggests both scenarios existed, depending on the region, the landowner, and local customs. Either way, you're quickly learning that survival here meant mastering the instruments of labor as if your life depended on them. Because it does. As you work, your muscles scream. Each thrust of the hoe or lift of the spade exhausts you more than the last. Sweat runs down your back, stinging your eyes, and every step sinks slightly into the damp soil. You imagine a modern gym and laugh bitterly. This is the ultimate full-body workout, without air conditioning or protein shakes. The work is rhythmical, almost meditative, if you can ignore the pain. Farmers chant softly as they move, counting steps, timing their digs with the movements of oxen. You try to mimic the cadence, but your body refuses coordination. You stumble, trip, and curse softly under your breath, while the locals, ever patient, guide your motions. Dust rises in the midday air, clinging to your sweaty skin, mixing with the smell of mud and river water. You think about modern fertilizers, tractors, and irrigation pumps, and it all feels absurdly luxurious in comparison. Every seed planted here demands sweat, skill, and the stubborn willingness to keep going, even when your body screams to stop. Historians still argue whether peasants considered the work joyful, a divine duty, or merely necessary drudgery. From your perspective, it's probably a bit of all three. You realize that the satisfaction comes not from comfort, but from accomplishment. Turning the earth, planting life, and knowing your efforts literally sustain your community. By the time the sun leans westward, your hands are blistered, your arms ache, and your feet feel as if they've molded into the soil. Yet despite exhaustion, There's a strange pride in what you've accomplished. This is survival in its rawest form. No shortcuts, no comforts, just human endurance and the rhythms of the land. By late afternoon, your muscles are singing a chorus of complaints, but the workday isn't over. Now comes the harvest, reaping grain with sickles so small, yet so sharp, that they demand precision and patience. You grip yours, trembling, and try to follow the steady rhythm of the locals. One wrong swing could cut the cord. One wrong swing could crush the stalks you're trying to gather. The field stretches endlessly, golden waves swaying in the wind, and you realize this task is as much about endurance as it is about skill. Here's the mainstream fact. Harvesting grain was a labor-intensive process. Peasants used bronze or flint sickles to cut wheat and barley, binding the stalks into sheaves. A single misstep could mean loss of food for weeks, making precision crucial. You glance down at your crooked sheaf, feeling guilty for the tiny error that could have been disastrous if this were your actual crop. A quirky tidbit: some ancient Egyptians reportedly sang work songs during the harvest, believing the rhythm would encourage the crops to grow faster. You hum along awkwardly, your voice cracking, and wonder if the wheat minds or is silently judging you. Probably the latter. Historians still argue whether the songs were purely functional or also ritualistic. Some evidence suggests they had symbolic value, invoking fertility and protection, while others think they simply made grueling labor more bearable. Either way, you'd gladly trade the tunes for a mechanical harvester. End quote. Sweat streaks your face and burns your eyes, but the glint of golden grain is oddly hypnotic. You reach down again, slice through the stalks, and gather them in bundles. The repetitive motion is exhausting, yet rhythmic. You start to feel a strange kinship with these fields. They demand respect, and each sheaf you hold feels like a small victory. Then come the bugs. Grasshoppers dart through the stalks, biting and buzzing in your ears. Flies hover near your sweat, and tiny ants crawl into the folds of your linen tunic. You swat and shake, but they persist, part of the environment you now realize you can't escape. The locals barely notice. This is everyday life for them. The midday sun has dipped lower, casting long shadows. You glance around. Fields stretch endlessly, workers bending, lifting, binding. Their faces are bronzed and lined, but calm. They've been doing this for decades. You've barely survived a few hours. Historians still argue how much of the harvest was actually consumed by peasants versus funneled to the state or temples. Taxation often took the majority, leaving families just enough to survive. You feel a pang of sympathy. Here you are, drenched in sweat, hauling sheaves, and imagining that most of your effort will vanish into a nobleman's granary. As you collapse briefly onto a sheaf, breathing hard, you realize survival in Egypt isn't just about food, water, or shelter. It's about rhythm, endurance, and patience, qualities you're only just beginning to cultivate. Evening descends slowly, bringing a faint relief from the sun's relentless glare. You trudge back toward the village, limbs aching, hands blistered, and back screaming with every step. The fields behind you glow gold in the waning light, and for a moment, the beauty almost distracts from the sheer exhaustion. Almost. You're aware now that life as a peasant in Egypt isn't just a job. It's a constant negotiation with your own body and the environment. Arriving home, you notice the villagers' preparations for the evening meal. Fires are rekindled, clay pots clink, and smoke rises, carrying the aroma of lentils, onions, and roasted fish. Hunger gnaws at you, sharper than any fatigue, reminding you that survival isn't only about work, it's also about access to food and timing your meals properly. Peasants often ate 2 main meals a day, a morning porridge or bread and beer, and an evening stew. You dig into a modest portion, grateful for the taste, but aware that tomorrow demands the same effort all over again. End of 12. Mainstream fact: peasants' diets were simple but functional, heavily reliant on bread, vegetables, legumes, and occasionally fish or poultry. Meat was rare, reserved for feasts or wealthy households. You chew slowly, appreciating that even this humble fare is a triumph over scarcity. A quirky tidbit: evidence suggests some peasants added natron, a naturally occurring salt, to their bread to preserve it longer, effectively inventing an ancient preservative. Me. You sneak a tiny pinch into your mouth and cringe at the bitter flavor, realizing survival often tastes strange. Historians still argue how often peasants truly had enough to eat, or if intermittent famine was a constant companion. Some sources suggest seasonal shortages were regular, while others argue people found ingenious ways to store and ration food. Either way, you feel every bite as a reminder of the precarious balance between labor and sustenance. The evening chores continue. You help fetch water, mend broken baskets, and tend to small animals. Donkeys bray, chickens cluck, and the occasional goose reminds you of your past indoor encounter. Fine, whispering sad. You swat at insects, now almost second nature, and marvel at the patience required for each task. The sky darkens, yet the village remains alive with movement. Children play in the courtyard, parents repair tools, and elders sit near fires, exchanging news and gossip. You realize that community, more than any tool or crop, is what keeps people alive in these harsh conditions. As night settles fully, you settle onto your mat, exhausted, but aware that tomorrow will bring the same cycle: work, hunger, labor, and minimal comfort. Historians still argue whether peasants viewed this life as duty, oppression, or divine blessing. You know only that you're utterly unprepared to live it for more than a day. Night has fully descended, and with it comes a chill that seeps into your bones. During the day, the sun has been your adversary. Now, the cold threatens the body you've pushed to its limits. You curl under a thin blanket of woven reeds, listening to the distant howls of jackals and the occasional bark of a village dog. The mud brick walls of your tiny home offer some protection, but not enough to keep out the damp night air. You realize that comfort, warmth, and privacy are luxuries beyond the reach of most peasants. Here's a mainstream fact: medieval peasants slept on mats or simple bedding, often shared with family and sometimes with livestock. But love, temperature regulation relied largely on layering clothes, body heat, and the occasional fire, which risks smoke inhalation indoors. You glance at the hearth. The embers are dim, barely keeping the frost at bay. You pull the blanket tighter, wishing for a feather bed. Quirky tidbit: some peasants kept small animals like cats or mice in their sleeping area, not only for companionship, but also to alert them to nocturnal predators. You imagine a mouse nibbling at your toes and shiver. Survival sometimes meant sharing close quarters with creatures that modern sensibilities would consider pests. Historians still argue whether sleeping arrangements prioritized warmth, security, or social hierarchy. Some evidence suggests families rotated sleeping positions according to the coldest nights, while other sources imply that ritual and superstition played a significant role in where and how people slept. Either way, the cold bites at your skin, and your teeth chatter involuntarily. You close your eyes, but the body refuses to relax completely. The exertion of the day leaves soreness everywhere: shoulders, knees, lower back, hands raw from tools. Every slight movement sends a jolt through your muscles. You recall how the villagers managed this day after day, season after season, often without complaint. You, by contrast, feel fragile and inadequate. Outside, the wind whistles through narrow alleyways, carrying the scent of the Nile and the faint tang of livestock. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls. The night is alive, not silent. You are not alone, yet isolation feels tangible. There is no modern comfort, no padded mattress, no thermostat to regulate the environment. Sleep eventually claims you, but it is restless. You dream of the day's labor, bending, lifting, hauling, digging, the rhythm of water through canals, and the swaying grain. Even in dreams, the Nile flows endlessly, the sun blazes overhead, and insects buzz relentlessly. You stir awake, adjusting your mat and blanket, acutely aware that tomorrow promises the same grind. Historians still argue how medieval peasants coped psychologically with continuous physical labor and environmental stress. Some suggest communal rituals and shared humor mitigated strain, while others propose a resigned acceptance to divine will. You lean toward both, laughter in the village, faith in unseen forces, and sheer stubbornness. By the time the first hint of dawn touches the mud brick rooftops, your body has learned a lesson in endurance. Comfort is fleeting, warmth is precious, and survival depends on constant adaptation. And even then, it may not be enough. Dawn creeps over the horizon, painting the village in pale gold, and you stir reluctantly, stiff from the night's restless sleep. Your body protests at every movement, each joint reminding you that yesterday's labor has not yet left. Outside, the village comes alive. Chickens cluck, oxen bellow, and the faint chatter of early risers carries through the cool morning air. You realize immediately that rest is never complete. Life here demands renewed effort with the first light. Your first task is tending to the animals. Goats bleat impatiently, their hooves clicking against the hard-packed dirt as they seek food. Cows low near the paddock, eager for milking. You kneel to handle a goat, gripping its horns awkwardly, and the creature shakes its head, narrowly avoiding your nose. Locals laugh softly, helping you right the animal without any harm. Handling livestock seems simple in theory, but your inexperience is painfully obvious. Mainstream fact: livestock was central to peasant survival in ancient Egypt. Goats provided milk, sheep offered wool, and cattle were crucial for plowing and transportation. Losing even a single animal could jeopardize a family's entire livelihood. You glance at your trembling hands and think about the fragility of life, when so much depends on creatures that can kick, bite, or bolt at any moment. Quirky tidbit: some peasants believed that certain animals, like cats, held magical protective properties. Cats were allowed to roam freely, catching vermin and, according to folklore, warding off evil spirits. One stray tabby weaves between your legs, purring like a tiny engine, and you feel a curious sense of safety amid the chaos. Historians still argue how much superstition influenced animal care. Were cats and other animals primarily practical, or did mystical beliefs genuinely shape daily routines? Likely, it was a mix. Survival combined with ritual, each reinforcing the other. After feeding, you join the water carriers to fetch the morning supply. The canals shimmer under the rising sun, the surface disturbed by dipping buckets. You struggle with the weight again, muscles already aching from yesterday, and curse the absence of modern pumps. Every step feels like resistance training, and you envy the villagers' ease, their bodies tuned to these motions over decades. Sweat forms rapidly, dripping into your eyes as the sun climbs. Insects follow you relentlessly, small bites burning as you work. You try to ignore them, recalling the protective coal and oils applied yesterday. Their efficacy is limited in the face of swarming gnats and persistent ants. You wonder how peasants endured the constant irritation without losing patience or sanity. Historians still argue whether these minor irritations were significant stressors or simply accepted background conditions. Judging by your own fraying patience, you suspect they were far more trying than one might assume. Yet the villagers moved steadily, speaking softly to each other, laughing at minor mistakes, and supporting one another in ways that modern laborers might envy. By mid-morning, the work is unrelenting but strangely rhythmic. You begin to understand that survival is less about heroic bursts of strength and more about persistent endurance, repetition, cooperation, and awareness of the environment. Even your aching body begins to anticipate the motions, guided by observation, trial, and error. By mid-morning, the village shifts into a coordinated frenzy of productivity. You follow the rhythm of the day, observing the seamless choreography of peasants moving between tasks. Some repair baskets or mend tools, while others tend small gardens tucked near mud brick homes. You attempt to assist, but your hands fumble, awkward against the practiced movements of seasoned villagers. Even pouring water into earthen jars becomes a challenge. The liquid sloshes over the edges, and the locals suppress gentle laughter as they guide your hands. Mainstream fact: peasants were skilled multitaskers. Their survival depended on balancing agriculture, animal husbandry, and household maintenance, often simultaneously. Every task, no matter how menial, contributed to the household's ability to endure the harsh seasons. You realize quickly that survival demanded attention, skill, and constant movement from dawn to dusk. Quickie tidbit: some villagers carried tiny personal charms made from clay, bone, or stones, tucked into pouches at their waists. These talismans were thought to protect against minor injuries, bad weather, or even mischievous spirits. You watch a woman tug at hers as she labors, and you wonder if it's superstition, or if it's simply a comforting ritual for enduring relentless toil. Historians still argue whether these charms were truly believed to hold power, or if they were more symbolic, a psychological crutch to maintain focus during exhausting work. Regardless, you can't deny that any small psychological edge seems useful when you're wobbling under the weight of buckets, bending to pick weeds, or hauling mud brick. The smell of baked earth fills the air, mingling with the scent of fresh herbs and livestock. You notice a child carrying a tiny bundle of onions, balancing them with careful precision. You attempt the same, only to drop half, eliciting a small groan from your spine and muffled laughter from your neighbors. They are patient, but you can sense the unspoken reality. This is survival work, not beginner-friendly. Sweat drips into your eyes and mouth as the sun climbs higher, and your linen tunic sticks to your back. You attempt to mimic a local's posture while lifting a heavy basket, but your grip slips, sending it crashing to the ground. You cringe at the wasted effort. In this world, mistakes aren't just embarrassing, they're costly. You glance at the nearby fields, seeing others at work, bent like reeds under the pressure of their labor. Your body aches in sympathy. Even minor tasks feel monumental now. You remember the earlier work with irrigation, hauling water, and tending animals, all seemingly small, yet all contributing to survival in a fragile environment. Historians still argue whether peasants saw their multitasking as drudgery or as a meaningful way of life. From your perspective, it's clear that endurance and adaptability are essential. In 1941, the ability to pivot from one task to the next while maintaining focus and care is not optional, it's survival itself. By late morning, your arms burn, your back protests, and your legs feel heavy as if you've been wading through mud for hours. And yet, there is a strange satisfaction in simply keeping up, in matching the rhythm of a people who have survived for generations by sheer persistence, cooperation, and knowledge of their environment. You are learning, slowly, that survival is less about heroics and more about steady, consistent effort that never pauses, even when your body pleads for respite. The sun has now reached its zenith, and the day's labor is at its most punishing. Heat radiates off the clay walls and golden fields, turning the air thick and heavy. You drag your tired limbs toward the next task, repairing a section of the irrigation canal that has begun to leak. Mud, water, and silt stick to your fingers, rubbing raw against your already blistered hands. Every movement is an exercise in patience, but you quickly realize that precision matters. A poorly patched canal could ruin an entire field of crops. Mainstream fact: maintaining irrigation channels was a constant necessity in ancient Egypt. Canals and ditches had to be cleared of silt, leaks patched, and walls reinforced, often before planting or during harvest. Failure to maintain them could mean severe crop loss, famine, or taxation penalties. You marvel at the precision required, while cursing your own lack of finesse. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists have found evidence that workers sometimes used animal dung mixed with straw to reinforce canal walls. Not exactly glamorous, but highly effective. You try to smooth a clump with your hands, grimacing at the pungent smell, and wonder if peasants ever complained, or if it was just accepted as part of the craft. Historians still argue whether canal maintenance was carried out communally or assigned to individual families. Some evidence suggests local communities worked together, while other records indicate that labor could be compelled by landowners or officials. Either way, you understand that cooperation and endurance are essential. You kneel, pressing mud into the wall with sweaty palms, feeling your fingers slip. The sun beats down relentlessly, and even the water you carry to soften the clay warms instantly. Small insects buzz around your arms. Unbothered small lessons of wet earth is overwhelming, clinging to your hair, clothing, and skin. Nearby, experienced workers move efficiently, their hands and arms darkened and hardened by repeated labor. They coordinate effortlessly, communicating with shouts and hand signals, while you fumble to keep pace. Each mistake makes you painfully aware of your outsider status. You probably wouldn't survive here more than a day. The canal slowly begins to take shape under your guidance, though the effort leaves your muscles trembling. You glance at the distant fields, where workers are planting and harvesting simultaneously. The coordination is impressive, a testament to centuries of knowledge passed down generation to generation. Crush. You realize that the survival of Egypt's agriculture depended on this exact combination of skill, endurance, and communal effort. Historians still argue how much of this labor was voluntary versus enforced, and whether peasants derived any satisfaction from these repetitive tasks. From your perspective, it's a blend of necessity, habit, and sheer resilience. You finish your section of the canal, drenched in sweat and exhausted, but with a small sense of accomplishment. Even minor victories feel monumental here. By mid-afternoon, you sit briefly on a canal bank, breathing heavily, reflecting on how every day demands relentless labor, and that this is what life meant for a medieval Egyptian peasant. Constant, coordinated, unyielding, and absolutely necessary for survival. As the afternoon stretches on, the sun begins its slow descent, but the day's labor shows no sign of easing. Your next task is weaving baskets and repairing fishing nets, a delicate yet essential skill that ensures the community has storage and access to food. You sit on the ground, reeds and fibers spread before you, trying to imitate the intricate patterns of your neighbors. Your fingers fumble, knots tighten too much or too little, and the reeds occasionally snap under your untrained hands. Though, you realize quickly that what seems simple in theory demands years of practice to master. Mainstream fact: basket weaving and net making were vital crafts for peasant life. But baskets held grain, vegetables, and small goods, while nets allowed for sustainable fishing along the Nile. Both were essential to daily survival, and the quality of these tools directly impacted a family's ability to store and consume food throughout the year. Your fumbling attempts give you a newfound respect for the artisans of the time. These, and May. Quirky tidbit. Some baskets were reinforced with papyrus strips that contained tiny inscriptions or magical symbols believed to bring protection and good fortune to their contents. Quote, leather pattern. You laugh quietly to yourself, imagining a barley-filled basket warded by tiny hieroglyphs. Perhaps it will guard against spilling, too. Historians still argue whether these embellments were primarily symbolic, functional, or a mix of both. Either way, you feel the pressure of producing something both sturdy and useful, knowing that a poorly made basket might collapse under the weight of grain, wasting hours of labor. Oh, your hands ache, fibers cut into your palms, and your back stiffens from hunching over the work. Sweat drips into your eyes, blurring your vision, and insects hover persistently, attracted by the moisture and warmth of your skin. Despite the discomfort, you notice a strange rhythm emerging. With every twist, loop, and knot, your motions become slightly more coordinated. It's small progress, but progress nonetheless. Nearby, older villagers work with fluid efficiency, occasionally humming softly or chatting with neighbors. Their movements seem effortless, almost meditative. You envy their experience and imagine years of repetition honing every gesture into second nature. Survival here, you think, is equal parts endurance, muscle memory, and patience. As you finish your first completed basket, however crooked it may be, a small sense of achievement warms you more than the lingering afternoon sun. Even simple victories, keeping water in a canal, lifting a heavy sheaf, weaving a functional basket, take on monumental significance in a life defined by daily labor. Historians still argue how much pride peasants took in their handiwork versus merely seeing it as necessary toil. From your current perspective, you understand both. Necessity drives action, but accomplishment, however modest, brings quiet satisfaction that keeps humans going. By evening, you lean back against a wall, body sore, hands calloused, but with a newfound appreciation for skills you never thought necessary. The sun dips lower, shadows stretching long across the village, and you realize the day has been a full immersion in survival. Not heroics, not glory, just the relentless rhythm of life, sustained by skill, cooperation, and endurance. The day wanes, and a cooler breeze drifts through the village, providing a small reprieve from the relentless sun. But your work is far from over. Now comes firewood gathering and preparation for the evening meal. You trudge toward the edge of the village, where small bundles of sticks and branches have been collected. Each bundle feels heavier than it looks, and your already exhausted muscles protest with every lift. You balance the wood on your shoulder, careful not to drop it as you navigate uneven ground and scattered stones. Mainstream fact: firewood was essential in daily life, not just for cooking, but also for warmth during the cooler desert nights. Gathering and storing it required planning, physical effort, and knowledge of the local terrain to avoid unnecessary risk. Online is low. You notice how every action, from cutting to stacking, is executed with precision, reflecting centuries of trial and error survival knowledge. Quirky tidbit: some villagers believed that placing a small figurine or charm near stored firewood would ensure it stayed dry and would burn evenly. You smirk at the idea, imagining a tiny clay soldier guarding a pile of twigs. Perhaps it works. Perhaps it's just a comforting ritual. Historians still argue whether such superstitions were widely practiced or limited to isolated communities. Either way, you're acutely aware that in this environment, Even small advantages, physical, psychological, or symbolic, can mean the difference between a comfortable night and misery. As you lift, carry, and stack, you become painfully aware of the endurance required to maintain even minimal comfort. Each movement strains your shoulders, arms, and back. You pause briefly to catch your breath, noticing a few locals working with remarkable fluidity, adjusting bundles of wood as if weight and balance were extensions of their own bodies. You feel clumsy by comparison. Once the firewood is stacked, you assist in preparing the evening meal. Clay pots clink and steam rises from the pottage, filling the air with a savory aroma. You chop onions, stir lentils, and add small grains of salt, grateful for the warmth of the fire, but aware that any mistake could spoil what little food there is. Even mundane cooking tasks demand attention and care. The village dogs circle, seeking scraps, while chickens cluck and peck at stray grains. Insects, undeterred by your presence, swarm near the firelight. You swat and brush them away, silently appreciating that your ancestors likely endured the same nuisances. Historians still argue how much leisure, if any, peasants enjoyed after a day of labor. Evidence suggests small moments, storytelling, simple games, or communal singing, provided relief, but the line between work and rest was thin. You realize that even at this late hour, survival requires vigilance, care, and the steady application of skill learned only through hard experience. By the time the last meal is shared and the fire burns lower, you slump against a wall, exhausted, sore, and mentally drained. The village hums softly around you, alive yet calm. The routine, repetition, and relentlessness of peasant life are now unmistakably clear. Every day is labor, every action matters, and every moment of comfort is fleeting and earned. Night has returned, darker now, more complete than the previous evenings. The village is quiet, except for the occasional murmur of conversation, the bray of a donkey, and the rhythmic scratching of a goat nibbling near the doorway. You sit on your thin mat, arms heavy, legs stiff, and hands blistered from the day's relentless labor. Every joint protests as you stretch, and you realize that even the simplest motions, lifting your head, rolling onto your side, require effort. Survival in ancient Egypt is not a mere struggle against hunger or heat. It's a constant negotiation with your own body and the environment. Mainstream fact: medieval peasants had little access to warm bedding, soft mattresses, or insulated clothing. They relied on layered linen, animal skins, and shared body heat to get through the cold nights. You pull your thin blanket around your shoulders, grateful for what little protection it provides. Quirky tidbit: some peasants hung small charms or amulets above sleeping areas, intended to ward off insects, snakes, or evil spirits. You imagine one dangling precariously over your head, promising protection against mosquitoes or bad dreams. Perhaps it's superstition. Perhaps it's the earliest form of psychological comfort for a weary worker. Historians still argue whether peasants attributed more significance to divine protection or practical experience when it came to nighttime survival. Likely, it was a mixture, rituals intertwined with necessity, creating a psychological buffer against an uncertain world. As you lie down, listening to the faint creak of the wooden roof beams, the smell of embers and lingering food, and the soft sighs of the village around you, you reflect on the day's lessons. The physical labor was immense, yes, but survival demanded more than strength. Endurance, patience, skill, observation, and cooperation were equally vital. You think of the irrigation canals, the harvest, the baskets, the firewood, the animals, each task interwoven into a fragile system that sustained life. Your body is exhausted, Yet your mind is alert, tracing patterns in the dim glow, remembering every motion, every slip, every small success. You understand now why peasants were rarely idle. Their lives depended on a continuous cycle of effort, adaptation, and attentiveness. Even moments of rest were brief and strategic, never indulgent. Outside, the desert night stretches silently, punctuated by distant calls of nocturnal creatures. You feel both insignificant and strangely connected to this timeless rhythm. Life was harsh, unrelenting, yet astonishingly organized through generations of experience and adaptation. Historians still argue how peasants emotionally coped with such continuous labor. You sense a combination of resilience, communal solidarity, and small pleasures in shared success. Without these, survival here would have been nearly impossible. You close your eyes, letting exhaustion wash over you, and imagine the cycle beginning again at dawn. For a brief, fleeting moment, you feel both humbled and awed by the sheer endurance of human life in this ancient world. Tomorrow, the sun will rise, and the work will resume. You probably wouldn't last more than a day, but you've seen enough to understand the brilliance, the struggle, and the quiet heroism of surviving ancient Egypt. Your mind drifts through the lessons of the day, the weight of water, the stubbornness of mud, the rhythm of planting and harvesting, the small victories of woven baskets and stacked firewood. You feel the repetitive pulse of survival in your own body, a deep understanding that life here was never easy, never indulgent, but always purposeful. There is humility in this recognition, a quiet awe at the resilience that carried communities through centuries of sun, sand, and Nile floods. Allow yourself to linger in this softness. It's life. Imagine the cool night air brushing against your skin, the distant sounds dimming, and a gentle peace filling the spaces once crowded with effort. Each inhale is calm, each exhale releases tension, and you let your thoughts slow, drifting between memory and imagination. Soon, your eyes feel heavier, your body lighter, and a sense of deep, untroubled rest settles over you. The world of toil, sun, and Nile fades, leaving only quiet reflection. You are safe here, in this gentle pause, surrounded by the echoes of a life so different, yet connected through the simple act of human perseverance. Now, let the last traces of tension dissolve. Your mind drifts softly, your breath steady, and the knowledge of ancient resilience becomes a gentle lullaby, easing you towards sleep. Let your dreams wander through golden fields, flowing canals, and humble homes, witnessing the endurance of those who came long before us. The village quiets further, and the night stretches around you like a soft, dark blanket. Your body sinks deeper into your mat, muscles gradually loosening as you let go of the day's tension. And the faint hum of insects, the distant whisper of the Nile, and the occasional rustle of wind through palm leaves create a lullaby that invites you to exhale fully, letting your breath slow and soften. You realize that even in the harshest of times, moments of calm are possible, delicate threads woven between labor and necessity. Imagine the warm golden sun of Egypt, slipping below the horizon, shadows lengthening, colors softening. The fields and canals you struggled with today fade into the gentle darkness, and the village settles under the same sky that has watched generations endure, survive, and thrive. You picture the villagers finally resting, their small homes quiet, except for the occasional murmur of a loved one or the soft shuffle of animals. Even the insects seem to rest, a rare reprieve in a world so alive with movement and life.